Hello everyone, I'm Brazen Eagle and thank you for joining me here. So today from the New York Post. According to Eric Spitznagel, why today's young men are terrified of sex. So, Mason, a former college football player from suburban Milwaukee, was almost 20 years old when he lost his virginity. It's a story you don't hear too often though. Boys, we're told, are having sex younger and more irresponsibly than ever, but as author Peggy Orenstein learned while doing research on her new book, Boys and Sex, Young Men on Hookups, Love, Porn, Consent, and Navigating the New Masculinity. Out now, the reality can be very different. For Mason, the simple act of kissing was something he largely avoided in high school, afraid that without enough experience he would do it wrong. He thought he was just supposed to know, writes Orenstein. Even holding hands felt like it came with the risk of humiliation. When he went to college, he met a girl, Jeannie, who invited him back to her dorm room to fool around. He wasn't able to perform and blamed it on the weed he'd been smoking all night. She texted him the next day, inviting him over to try again, but the more he thought about it, Orenstein writes, the more anxious he became. Once again, his attempts at intimacy fizzled. For Orenstein, who spent 2 decades writing about the sexuality of girls with bestsellers like Girls and Sex and Don't Call Me Princess. Wow, must be great bestsellers. Mason's predicament was difficult to take seriously at first. Like many of us, she bought into the cultural stereotypes that all guys are sexually insatiable, she writes, ever ready, incapable of refusal, regret or injury, an idea that just reinforced the most retrograde idea of masculinity. Over the past 2 years, though, Orenstein spoke to hundreds of boys, not men, boys across the United States, ranging in age from their early teens to mid-20s and spanning all races, socioeconomic backgrounds, religious beliefs, and even sexual orientations. She learned that a surprising number of them don't live up to gender cliches, meaning that they aren't hormone-driven Frankenstein's monsters, obsessed with sex and unconcerned with the consequences. In fact, they're pushing back against cultural expectations, and many are going so far as to avoid sex altogether, according to the latest data by the General Social Survey, which I covered a few months ago. Men between the ages of 18 and 29 are having less sex than ever. The number of abstinent men has nearly tripled in the last decade, from 10% in 2008 to 28% last year in 2019. But as Orenstein discovered, it's a movement that largely exists in secret. Rather than declare their abstinence, they come up with excuses for their lack of sexual interest, like the college sophomore Orenstein interviewed who frequently faked whiskey dick to avoid hookups, or Mitchell in LA who avoided sex with his high school girlfriend for years because he was terrified that his sexual ability would be just sufficient. While girls struggle to find the magic middle ground between prude and sluts, boys are pushed to be as sexually active as possible, Orenstein writes, to knock out their firsts, regardless of the circumstances or how they felt about their partners. Nate, a high school junior from the San Francisco area, is terrified of sex because he's certain the girls in his peer group already have more experience than him. Well, he's probably right. She's probably going to know how to do things and you won't, he told Orenstein. That's a problem if she tells people you've got floppy lips or don't know how to get her bra off. He wants to have a girlfriend someday, but for now, Nate says he's afraid of intimacy. This paralyzing fear of sexual inadequacy begins for many boys with online pornography. Sexually explicit videos have never been so easy to find. A 2018 Bitdefender study found that 22% of online porn is watched by kids under the age of 10, and it's warping their formative ideas about sex. Mason has been watching porn since he was 14, and he claims to convince him that a hot woman would just magically appear and offer herself up to him. That was my whole perception of how it was supposed to go, he said. While the boys who spoke to Orenstein admit that porn is about as authentic as pro wrestling, a 2016 study from the London-based Middlesex University found that 53% of teen boys believe that the sex acts performed or featured in porn are mostly realistic. Well, there you go. You got teenage boys telling you what they think is realistic. Everyone watches porn and then gets super nervous about their penis size. A college sophomore from Chicago told Orenstein, I mean, it's brutal. Like, if you're in the locker room, you're going to turn around and try to hide yourself, or you're not going to change in front of other guys. Wow. Come on, man. It's not always porn doing the most damage. Porn may offer the most ridiculous representations of sex, but mainstream media can spread just as much misinformation, and it's more difficult for younger audiences to separate fact from fiction because they have no frame of reference. Mason had recently been watching the David Duchovny TV comedy Californication about a womanizing novelist in LA. The sexual exploits are just slightly unrealistic, Mason says. Like, the main character has sex with everyone wherever he goes. They made it seem so convincing, whereas if you were to watch a porn video where a dude comes in with his sexual organ in a pizza box, it's like, alright, obviously that ain't going to happen in real life. Dylan, who is 17, a minor, is a high school junior in Northern California. He's supposedly handsome, athletic, a straight-A student, and captain of the soccer team, and he was also until recently a virgin. He had drank too much at a friend's party and passed out on a couch. That's where his friend Julia, who was sober, found him. She dragged Dylan, stumbling to the bathroom, and had sex with him on the floor, which means he couldn't consent. He was intoxicated. The next morning, Dylan was horrified and asked Julia why she forced herself on him. "I didn't want to do that," he told her, insisting that he wanted his first time to be special. "Oh, please," she shot back. "Don't give me that. All guys want it." It was a bias that even Ornstein admits to having. She was shocked by how often the boys shared stories of being on the receiving end of unwanted sex, in which girls didn't hear or didn't respect. "No," Ornstein writes. "Was it rape? You bet your ass it was rape." First of all, he's 17. In the state of California, the age of consent is 18, so that's already rape. And he was drunk. I mean, that's quite literally rape of a minor. It's absolutely rape. The boys she interviewed weren't sure. She recalls a college sophomore who told her of losing his virginity at 14 to a 17-year-old girl at his first high school party. He didn't want to do it, he says, but he was too drunk and too worried about rumors she might spread to leave. Like, if it's a guy who didn't consent, he asked Ornstein, "What do you call that?" "That's called rape." According to a 2017 study at Columbia University, 80% of victims of sexual assault were women, but men were also being increasingly targeted, with 1 in 8 male students reporting being coerced into non-consensual sex. Non-consensual sex sounds like rape still. And in a 2017 study at New York University, sociologist Jesse Ford interviewed 40 straight male and female college students about their sexual experiences. Most men admitted that they would have sex even if they didn't want to, because guys should always be down to screw. Rejecting an invitation to sex was considered unmanly or homosexual. And I can actually give you probably a good reason why the culture has gone that way. But that's for another day. When young men have sex forced upon them, it sends mixed signals and makes it harder for them to understand the concept of consent altogether. If they can't say no, Ornstein writes, how are they supposed to hear it? The solution for all this isn't what most parents want to hear. They need to have a straightforward talk with their sons about sex. "I know it's awkward, I know it's excruciating, I know it's unclear where to begin," Ornstein writes, "but this is your chance to do better." Mason agrees, and he can remember the exact moment where some parental intervention would have made a difference. He was a teenager, sitting on the basement couch of his family's home and browsing porn on his school-supplied iPad. "Son, you don't do that. Don't do that on the school-supplied iPad." His father walked in and saw what he was doing. "You shouldn't be watching that." His dad scolded him. "It's bad for you." Mason was well aware that his father had himself a trove of bookmarked porn on his own computer, so he snapped back. "Don't be a hypocrite. I've seen all the stuff you watch." That's a little awkward. His father didn't say another word. He turned on the TV, watched it silently with his son, and then went to bed. "I feel he sort of failed me," Mason told Ornstein. If he had used the opportunity to start a conversation to tell his son that this will skew the way you view women, it's only going to keep you from interacting with girls in a healthy manner, Mason thinks it could have made the difference for him. "But my parents were too fearful to actually deal with any of it," he says. Real conversations about what's actually involved in a healthy sexual relationship can make all the difference. For Mason, it finally happened with his girlfriend Jeannie, who repeatedly tried and failed to seduce him. After their third date together, in which Mason declined to have sex with her yet again, she asked him pointed questions about his anxiety and why sex felt so scary to him. Well, obviously it doesn't sound very scary to Jeannie. It felt like a storybook moment, Mason recalled. Her openness to his insecurity and lack of sexual confidence allowed him to let his guard down. Whatever nerves had affected me the previous times disappeared, and I realized if I can't be fully vulnerable mentally and emotionally, it stops me from being able to be vulnerable physically. Because the naked body, he adds, like an epiphany that's taken his entire childhood to realize, that's a very vulnerable thing, you know? Well, there we have it. Let's go back to the top, though. So some guys, I guess, are insecure when it comes to females and sexual encounters. I'm sure this actually happens, and, some guys, not many guys, but some guys are, I guess, insecure because they probably really have no experience or, frame of reference with females, like 80% of women go for the top 20% of males and leave the other 80% of men behind. Briefholt's law exists for a reason, which is, of course, that the female determines the conditions of the animal family, and when females can't get any benefit from being around a male, then, of course, there will be no association. However, I will say that men aren't just insecure with females, but quite a few men understand that women are not necessarily worth it, and there are men who actively avoid them, but let's continue on. So the author here uses Mason from Milwaukee as an example. The author details that Mason was insecure about what to do with females and whether or not he would be seen as competent enough for a female or relationship. Now, like I said earlier, males without enough experience will feel anxious and insecure. This could happen with anything, really, such as starting your very, very first job, learning how to drive for the very first time, or even moving away for the first time. It's normal to be anxious when you haven't done anything like this before. And guys who don't have a lot of experience with girls will, of course, need more experience to become comfortable if they choose to associate with females. Now, the next thing that's brought up here is the stereotype that males are sexually insatiable. The idea that men or males are always ready to have sex and will never turn down an opportunity to engage in sexual activity. Well, there are many, many simps in the world who do anything, quite literally anything, to get sex. Some guys, they're not like that. This article brings up that the number of abstinent men has almost tripled in the last decade, and that some guys are actually seeking out ways to not get involved with females. Interaction with women can be a ticking time bomb, but you know what? Let's continue again. We've established that some guys are, of course, insecure when it comes to female interaction. Part of this comes from the fact that girls, in general, are way more sexually experienced, and guys don't want to feel inferior when it comes to sexual encounters and relationships. Just makes sense. The article alludes that porn is the reason for the lack of experience for males, which might be a little true. Maybe. But I would say porn probably isn't the main issue. Sure, porn can lead to unrealistic expectations, especially if you have no frame of reference, but it's probably not the main culprit. For men to get experience with females, of course, it takes real face-to-face interaction with a female that is attracted to the male, and that's the crux of the problem. 80% of females, like I said earlier, go for the top 20% of males. That means some men won't get any or very, very little experience with female. It's just nature working its magic, but most men, or at least a good chunk of men, would say it's gotten worse. This imbalance has gotten even worse in the past decade. It doesn't help that females gradually have had higher and higher expectations within the past decade, if not, of course, the past 40 to 50 years because of mandatory equality. Now, this article continues saying that Dylan, here in the article, was raped as a minor right here from Northern California. The girl Julia said that she thought that all males wanted sex at all time. She quite literally raped an underage child in California. Like I said, the age of consent in California is 18. But then again, this child, Dylan, is male, so of course nothing will happen to the girl, Julia. So, Finally, I do want to bring up the final thing that this article does state. The little few paragraphs. Mason states that he opened up to his girlfriend about his insecurity. He says he was relieved when he did that. But for those of us who understand female nature, we know that this is and will always be a huge no-no. That is one thing you do not do. Never open up to a female. They are instinctually wired to reject information like that and will see the male as a less attractive partner, even though the female might say that it's okay to do so in the moment. Never, ever do that if you want to keep your attraction to a female. They don't want weakness. And you know what? Other guys don't want weakness either. But at the end of the day, like I said earlier, some men, they're avoiding women, I guess, because they feel insecure, especially if they're younger. It's true to some extent, I guess, but I'm sure there are other reasons to avoid women as well, such as trying to avoid a false rape accusation and the legacy of Pound Me Too, avoiding situations that could later be labeled as sexual assaults, such as touching a girl's arm, and of course understanding that women are giant liabilities in a man's life. It's unfortunate, but at least it's honest. Anyways, thank you very much for watching. I'm Brazen Eagle, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.